Later, we see Agatha strolling through the town with the prince and other Slumber Island witches. My guy is feeling quite tired, yawning over and over, which is just annoying the hell out of Agatha. She's literally itching to slap him awake with a palm full of snow, but she doesn't want her fellow witches to misunderstand anything. As they walk, she notices that his inner district is far too neat and orderly. However, these houses aren't anything special, and even the castle is nowhere near as grand as the scholarly guild tower. Agatha then asks how many people are living here, to which Nightingale responds that they started with around 2,000. Of course, Agatha is shocked and asks how the hell a town with only 2,000 people is going to take on the devils. But she's even more bewildered when Nightingale reveals that the population has grown to 30,000. Agatha can hardly believe it and wonders if they counted the nearby villages too. You see, cities need to expand when they reach a certain population, and she knows all too well that this can cause problems. The demand for food and water skyrockets, poorer districts suffer huge blows to safety, and an overburdened population can weaken defenses and paralyze the city. She understands all these difficulties that come with expanding civilization from her own experiences, and she can't help but think that maybe Nightingale doesn't realize just how tricky it can be. As they approach the wall, the soldiers promptly salute the prince, and the prince quickly tells them to get ready for the test. Agatha, on the other hand, sneers and asks if this is the wall they've been boasting about. It has neither palisades nor moats, and she's certain that devils could easily climb over it without any tools. My guy just tells her to hold her horses and watch. That's when he proudly introduces the border town's new weapon, the 152mm Standard Fortress Howitzer, powered by Justice and Glory. He boasts that it has many improvements over the 12-pound field cannon and possesses outstanding qualities that make it an age-defining weapon. Nightingale perks up at this speech, clapping in full excitement, while Agatha still looks unimpressed, unsure what's so exciting about it. The prince clears his throat and tells Ironaxe to start the test, while Agatha still looks dejected, thinking to herself that they're just wasting time. The last word he said about justice and glory didn't even make sense and sounded completely made up. Once the preparations are complete, the prince tells everyone to cover their ears, leaving Agatha bewildered that they're ready so soon. Every witch in the area covers her ears tightly as they fire the giant shell with incredible speed, leaving nothing but flames behind. Agatha trembles in anxiety at the massive explosion, and once the fire subsides, Nightingale asks her if she's all right, and the icy witch replies that she's fine. She looks ahead and sees nothing, wondering why nothing happened, and if those flames were just for intimidation. Meanwhile, the prince is trying to see where the shell landed, and Sylvie points out that it hit a small hill. The red flag is the nearest marker, but there's still some distance to cover. Agatha asks for clarification about what's going on, and the prince explains to her that this weapon can shoot artillery shells. She can think of it as a ballista bolt aimed at enemies far away. They had planted red flags 5,000 meters away, but the shells only landed a little over 3 miles. Agatha finds it amazing that there are no ropes or anything, so how did they even launch a projectile that far? Even a siege beast powered by magic would have a range of around 2 miles at most. If this weapon is actually capable of such distances, then they can definitely fend off devils approaching the wall. However, she's worried that a weapon of this caliber will take time to reload and fire again. That's where she finds herself mistaken because the prince casually tells everyone that he's not done yet, and that they will now test 3 shells at rapid fire with a closer target. Once the weapon launches those shells, the area where they landed erupts in chaos and fire, leaving Agatha in awe. At that speed, even an extraordinarily powerful creature wouldn't be able to dodge that attack. She's sure that if Tequila had a weapon like this, the devils would never be able to breach their walls. She then asks the prince if this weapon was developed by witches. He replies that it's technically true, as it was the combined effort of both witches and mortals. You see, Anna smelted each part individually, while Usia extracted purified elements, and Sylvie checked for all imperfections. The shells were developed by the alchemists and their apprentices, and every witch involved, except Anna, is a support witch. Well, this is finally a solid slap to her face, and she has started to think that mortals might actually defeat the devils after all. Let's not forget about Princess Tilly as well. She's also not very used to seeing the godly weapons my guy is whipping up. We also see Andrea and Ash. Andrea is confused about how this was even constructed and where its power comes from, while Ash thinks this is just like how Andrea shoots her magic arrows. Andrea proudly reminds her that her radiant magic bow is completely different from this thing. Meanwhile, Princess Tilly feels quite left behind. She can't help but think how her brother is really far away from her in terms of advancements and knowledge, and she has no clue what goes through this goofball's mind. Meanwhile, as much as he might be feeling proud of himself, but he is equally devastated internally because this test has cost him a shit ton of money, and his heart is literally aching. He even looks quite dejected for a moment, leaving Tilly even more confused about his eccentricities. Later that evening, once they found themselves in the castle, the prince invited his sister for a discussion. It was apparently about how he's going to deal with the Third Divine War and their future. He starts the conversation by stating that they've learned from Agatha that the four great kingdoms are merely a fraction of the realm of Dawn. Even the wastelands used to be fertile lands, and humans had no choice but to retreat here after losing to the devils twice. The gate will open soon, and the Third Divine War will soon be upon them, so he's hoping his sister can stay here. Tilly goes quiet for a moment before breaking into a happy smile, saying she didn't think he would say that. The prince then explains that the devil's power is unpredictable, and they have to combine all their forces if they want to win. Although Agatha mentioned that the First Divine War was fought through the efforts of both witches and mortals, it's very likely they were only allies on the surface. It wasn't very different from the Second War. He reminds her that his new plans include weapons that can defeat devils, and he has already shown proof of that. Once he turns these ideas into reality, mortals can be more powerful than they've ever imagined. He believes that the right choice is to send mortals into the war while assigning witches to manufacture weaponry. Before the war begins, every extra worker will only make them stronger. Tilly then asks, if she stays, what will happen to the witches at Slumber Island? Well, this sounds like a green light, and the prince bursts into happiness that his sister is actually ready to stay. He quickly tells her that they can all come to the border town, and they have more than enough space to shelter them. He will assign them a large swathe of land and make sure they are treated equally to the Witch Union. They don't have to join the Witch Union, and she can remain their leader. Princess asks if he don't mind that most of them are not able to fight. To this, he says he has no problem at all. In fact, he believes that support witches are more useful than combat witches. They don't empower themselves, rather, they benefit thousands of others. The natural world is full of undiscovered potential, and if they utilize it, support witches will be invaluable. His sister smirks upon hearing this and asks if this was his true objective all along, leaving him startled after getting caught. In any case, she finally says that she can work on these terms, as there's no reason for her to reject his offer to fight against the devil's invasion. Personally, she also wishes to stay here and learn about his interesting newfound knowledge, though she can't agree to anything just yet. The prince asks why not, and she explains that since she is the elected leader of Slumber Island, their future cannot be influenced by her personal desires. If they move to the western region, they will lose their independence, and if anything happens, they will be helpless to resist. She reminds him that if a conflict arises between the two siblings, there is no surety that he won't kick out all of her witches from the border town. The prince startles and stumbles over his words while Tilly makes it clear that she cannot entrust their future on just one word alone. She asks him if he would entrust everything if the roles were switched. The prince tries to tell her that she is his sister, and he would never dare to hurt her. But Princess Tilly replies that she still finds it difficult to believe, so she can't accept his offer immediately. She decides to continue their relationship as allies for now. He will have her full support for the border town's expansions, and if he needs any witches, she will do her best to satisfy his request. And if the devils overwhelm him, he is welcome to Slumber Island to live the rest of his life in peace. With that, their discussion wraps up. Once she is gone, Roland sinks into despair. Nightingale pops up beside him and asks what he said to her that day when she arrived at the border town. He replies that he only told her half the truth, so he can understand if she doesn't believe him right away. He then gives an analogy to Nightingale, reminding her that if her brother came back completely different, what would be her honest reaction? She raises an eyebrow and asks if he's talking about the guy who literally stabbed her in the back. The prince feels out of place and quickly says he shouldn't have brought that up. Nightingale reassures him that she has left the Glenn family behind. That family feels like strangers to her now. Come to think of it, we have come so far in the story that I have literally forgotten about her tragic background. Anyhow, the prince reminds her that he's now like a stranger to her sister as well, and besides, she didn't like him from the start when they used to live in the castle together. Nightingale leans in and says she's curious about his life in the royal castle. She also wants to know just how awful he was, given his infamy even reached Silver City. The prince feels embarrassed and admits he was much worse than she might think. He figures Tilly probably started hating him after he pushed her into that pile of broken glass. Nightingale agrees that he did some seriously bad stuff, but she doesn't think she hates him now. The prince asks how she knows that, to which Nightingale replies that Tilly has never lied to him, and if she really did hate him, she wouldn't still be here. He then politely asks if she's just saying that to make him feel better. Nightingale pouts and insists she means it. She reminds him how Tilly agreed to send witches to support the town and help fight against the devils. So how is that any different from her staying here? Also, she jokes that if all the witches from Slumber Island come at once, it's going to be really annoying, especially if there are more people like Ash. Not everyone is as friendly as Maggie, after all. Just as they're talking, Nightingale notices someone approaching and quickly starts to disappear. When the prince gives permission for the visitor to enter, Agatha steps inside. As the prince makes her comfortable in a chair, she points out that, according to Miss Wendy, he was the one who developed both the incredibly powerful muskets and cannons that can rival a Transcendent. She then asks if there are any mechanisms or blueprints recorded in those books of his. The prince promptly pulls out 2 books and asks if she's referring to Natural Science 101 and Chemistry 101. He explains that these books only highlight the fundamental principles, but they don't contain any blueprints. Agatha then reluctantly says that since only the Witch Union can have access to these books, then she requests to join it. The prince cheekily reminds her that the Witch Union is an organization within Border Town, and he asks if she's really willing to work for it, since its leader isn't a transcendent witch but just an ordinary guy. Agatha bows her head and replies that his knowledge to create weapons capable of destroying devils makes him far from typical. As long as he doesn't oppose alliances and ensures the survival of witches, she wouldn't mind working for the Witch Union. Though she looks a bit reluctant, even the prince is surprised by her acceptance, since he wasn't expecting her to agree so easily. He then asks why she didn't join Tilly on Slumber Island, since it's a city built by witches. Agatha responds that she has no interest in joining a refuge. To her, it's all pointless if they can't fight off the demons. The prince then reminds her that since he also wants to crush the church, she might be seen as an enemy by the Alliance survivors, as it's possible they simply changed their names and stayed hidden all these years. After putting in a lot of thought, he's come to the conclusion that even if the Alliance lost Tequila, they would still have extraordinary transcendent witches and divine warriors. Since they migrated to underdeveloped lands, it's unlikely they just disappeared. He even believes the church might have been founded by the Alliance, not mortals, and that mortals didn't steal the divine punishment method from witches. Instead, it was created by witches to hunt other witches and mass-produce divine punishment soldiers. We, of course, already know the truth, and the prince isn't far off, as the church was indeed founded by the Alliance. Agatha, however, is having a hard time believing that it was the Alliance that started the oppression and slaughter of witches. The prince says it's all just his hypothesis for now. He then pulls out a book and reveals that it's a historical record written by the church, which also includes a chronicle of the 4 great kingdoms. He tells Agatha she can study it if she wants, but no matter what, the church is now their enemy. One of his goals is to destroy them, so if she decides to stand with the witches and fight the devils with him, the Witch Union will welcome her. Well, we all know what her decision will be. The scene then transitions outside, where Agatha demonstrates her abilities. The prince and Nightingale watch closely, and Nightingale notes that Agatha's magic is shaped like pentagonal prisms, with her capacity being at an intermediate level. Sister Scroll categorizes Agatha as a summoning-type witch who has already evolved once. She originally had the ability to create cool temperatures, but after her evolution, she can freeze the air into ice, which is a very convenient power. The prince then asks how she evolved, to which Agatha replies that it was through continuous practice and a sudden epiphany. She explains that she practiced every day to freeze water at a faster speed and lower the temperatures even more. One day, she saw a witch melt lead with her flames, and as the lead started to bubble from the rising temperature, that is when she realized that everything has 3 forms: gas, liquid, and solid. Lead exists as a solid at room temperature, but with enough heat, it can become a gas. Similarly, water exists as a liquid at room temperature, but with enough cooling, it turns to ice. This revelation transformed her magic from within. After ascending to a higher-tier witch, she recorded the principle into the Codex of Principles. The prince nonchalantly asks her what this Codex of Principles is. Agatha, a bit bewildered, responds that she's surprised the prince isn't more shocked about the concept of matter shifting from solid to liquid and then to invisible gases. To which the prince asks her why he should be surprised, especially since it's a common observation that gases come in many different types, each with its own boiling and melting points. So there's nothing to be surprised about, and it's all covered in Natural Sciences 101. Of course, poor Agatha is annoyed that her important discovery has been dismissed, like it's just trivial knowledge. She then reluctantly says that the Codex of Principles is a record of every high-tier transcendent witch's awakening process. She further explains that since every witch has different abilities, it's tough to imitate someone else's experiences. The prince then asks her if there weren't any witches with similar abilities that transcendent witches had, since there are thousands in the Alliance. Agatha explains that the scholarly guild believes the shape of magic determines its abilities, and no witch has the exact same shape. But the prince pushes back, asking how she knew that Anna is a flame type. Agatha reveals that it's just a common designation. Any ability that glows or gives off heat can be categorized as a flame type. Agatha goes on to explain that as magic grows, matures, or even awakens, similar abilities can become incredibly different. A basic flame ability might eventually lead to better control of temperature, bigger size, more intensity, or even creating projectiles. The Scholarly Guild has much more formal categories, which are pretty similar to what they use. Sister Scroll then asks if they also have 3 types of witches, but Agatha explains there are actually 4. The main difference lies in summoning, and the guild splits it into 2 types. First, there's conjuring, and second, construction. The prince then points out that Anna is a conjuring witch because she constantly drains her magic, and the things she summons disappear when she stops. Soraya, on the other hand, would be a constructing witch because her paint can exist on its own. Agatha adds that she's not too familiar with Soraya's abilities, but that sounds about right. She also mentions that a summoning construction magic would hold its form, like her ice. The prince smirks and says that their test will end here for today. When Agatha doesn't have any tasks, she's free to practice her abilities on her own. However, he hints that someone might desperately need her help. Agatha curiously asks who, and the prince tells her that Kyle Sichi, the chief alchemist in Bordertown, could use her assistance. Apparently the guy's been acting like a maniac, pushing forward despite the risks, and poor Nana has been terrified, constantly healing him over and over. Later, back at the castle, the prince is deep in thought about how maintaining a stable temperature is crucial for safely extracting nitroglycerin. Agatha's ice coffin could easily keep things below freezing, which is perfect for cooling the reaction vessels under pressure. But he's also a bit worried about whether Agatha will get along with Kyle, given that Kyle is blunt and Agatha comes off as an arrogant royal. Just as he's lost in thought, Margaret tries to pull him out of his daydream. He quickly snaps back to reality, and she asks him what's wrong, wondering if he's upset because she charged too much to transport the refugees. He quickly denies it, saying that if it weren't for her ships, those refugees would have died in the freezing slums of other cities. Margaret then remarks that it's rare for him to ask for her help with such urgency, so she'll try her best. But many of her sailors aren't willing to travel in winter, so she's only managed to gather 13 ships. She also mentions that she probably won't be able to visit as often next year. The prince asks if she's talking about the Saltpeter Trade Convention, and she responds positively. Apparently, Timothy has banned the saltpeter business, and even the cities of Redwater and Silver aren't selling it anymore. Her only options now are to sell at a low price to the Alchemy Association or to elites in the capital. She's also heard from government officials that Timothy plans to lock down the entire western region. It won't just be saltpeter. Merchants will be trapped in Redwater, and Bordertown, Longsong Fortress, and Willowtown will all be affected as well. Many elites are opposing this, but Timothy probably won't retract his orders. If they can't trade saltpeter and other resources here, even the steam engine business might have to stop. The prince's expression turns serious as he listens, realizing that Timothy has become desperate ever since the witches dropped that nuke on his castle. Otherwise, he wouldn't be making such a risky move. You see, saltpeter is crucial for producing acid and other resources. If they lose access to that, their 152mm cannons will just be decorations, and their new rapid firearms will be useless too. Since Border Town is still in its early stages of development, without income from the steam engines, he is worried the region's economy could easily collapse. The prince reassures her that what Timothy is doing won't last long and that she'll be visiting Border Town again very soon. He adds that when she does, it will be a brand new city. He goes on to share his plans to open a commercial sea route contracted with the bay that won't pass through Seabreeze Town or Clearwater Port. Instead, it will go directly from the western region to the Bay Islands. He asks if she's interested, but she admits she's not sure if there are any harbors that reach the ocean. The prince replies that not right now, but he's going to build one. He reveals that there's a shallow beach south of Border Town with ideal water depth and size, making it perfect for a seaport. With some modifications and clearing the mountains along the coast, they could export goods from the western region. She would manage the ship transportation and sales, while the western region would provide merchant goods. He then calls out to his butler, Sean, telling him to show Margaret the newest goods. Sean promptly brings over a bunch of bottles, and the prince encourages Margaret to open one and smell it. Once she does, she's shocked to realize it's perfume. She can hardly believe he started making perfume. The prince just asks if it compares to what the Alchemy Association makes. Margaret admits that this stuff actually seems more potent, and she can only think of one word: amazing. She wonders if it was made by Border Town's alchemists. The prince tells her she can have those for free. She happily accepts the gift and asks how many bottles he can produce in a year, explaining that the Bay merchants are very particular about fishy odors, and the capital's Alchemy Association can never keep up with demand. The prince keeps his tone low-key and says that if they have enough ingredients, he can produce up to 10 times the Alchemy Association's output. But deep down, he knows it could be even more now that Leaf and Evelyn are collaborating. He's confident their sales will skyrocket, but he can't just sell it like cabbages. The prince is hoping that Margaret will help him spread these goods, and she smiles, saying this is quite a rare opportunity for her, so she will try her best to make the most out of it. A little later, Agatha finally finishes reading the books. She finds it hard to believe that a mortal wrote something like this. The more she reads, the more she understands the world as a chaotic place, with hidden laws that everyone must follow. If this person were in Tequila, the Alliance would definitely accept him, and he would be treated just like a high-tier witch. She wonders where he gained this knowledge because she used to think mortals were limited when it came to technology. Tilly responds that she doesn't have a clue either. She explains that back then, her brother was arrogant, cowardly, and talentless. He was illiterate, and his personality was pretty terrible too. She further says that he was just a waste of oxygen, not a prince, to which Agatha replies that this sounds like a typical mortal. Tilly insists he wasn't even great by mortal standards. She explains that he always keeps things to himself while expecting others to believe in him, which is just impossible. Abruptly, Tilly goes quiet when she realizes she's said too much. Anna reassures her that it's the first time she's heard her talk about these things. But Tilly still feels terrible because she's supposed to be the Witch Union ally, and that was pretty rude of her. That's when Anna assures her it's fine, saying the prince wouldn't care about something like that. She believes he has his own issues to deal with. Tilly then mentions that in the beginning, he was just like everyone else, except maybe a bit more outspoken. However, once she heard rumors that he wanted to marry witches, his older brother Timothy and Gerald started bullying him in the name of justice, and his personality began to get worse. Agatha finds it odd that he was teased for wanting to marry a witch because in Tequila, that would have been a respectable dream. There aren't many mortals who marry witches, and most witches don't want to spend the rest of their lives stuck with a man. Tilly adds that everything is different now. If he marries a witch, it would mean he wouldn't have any heirs. But she figures that since it's been over 10 years, he's probably forgotten about the idea of marrying witches. That's when Anna tells them that the prince still wants to marry a witch, which shocks Tilly, and Anna further claims he said it himself. The scene then transitions to Longsong, and we finally see Ambassador Petrov after a long time. As he gets out of bed, his lover asks if he's not going to sleep a little longer since it's too early for him to be up. He replies that the prince wants to meet him, so he is going to visit the border town. She questions why he's going out in this harsh weather. Petrov explains that it must be something important, so he needs to get ready. He'll be gone by the afternoon, and he tells her to head home. He'll come back for her when he returns. The girl asks why he can't just ignore him. She points out that even though the prince has captured Longsong Fortress, Petrov is still its ruler, and she's sure that even a king's orders wouldn't require such urgency. Petrov gently pats her head, saying that the western region is out of the king's control, but Prince Roland governs it. Roland isn't just the leader of the border town, he oversees the entire western region. With that, Petrov begins his journey, accompanied by a few of his men. As they walk, he reflects on how, ever since the months of demons began, there hasn't been much to do at Longsong Fortress. Since his father is filling in for him, and with the help of his servants and apprentices, they should definitely be able to handle things while he's off visiting the border town. He thinks back to how, just a year ago, he also traveled to the border town in the midst of snow, carrying a warning from Duke Ryan which he had to deliver to Prince Roland. Now he's heading there simply because of a letter from the prince. Suddenly they hear some commotion nearby. Petrov tells his men to check it out, adding that if it's just a typical scuffle, they should kick the troublemakers back into their homes. Later, Petrov's men take out troublemakers causing the ruckus. One of them is an elderly lady, who points accusingly at a red-haired girl, telling everyone they must kill her because she's a demonic witch. But there's a kid standing by the girl's side, insisting she's not demonic at all. He argues that, just like in the plays, there are good witches and bad witches, so there's no reason to harm her. The poor girl is crying, trembling in fear. Petrov calmly asks the elderly woman if she's certain the girl is a witch. The woman insists it's true and warns him not to be misled by those theater plays. She claims she saw the girl using her demonic powers to melt snow off the roof, saying she witnessed it with her own eyes and doesn't know what this girl is plotting. She then laments how all of the churches have been burned down in the western region, but she is sure that the holy city will build more and everyone will be able to achieve God's pity and protection. That's when Petrov tells his men to lock up the old hag, stating he wants every believer of the church locked away once he returns. With that, they drag the old woman out, and Petrov squats down, gently asking the little girl to show her powers if she really is a witch. The boy beside her warns Petrov not to touch her. The girl, on the other hand, trembles, unsure of what to do, but Petrov reassures her that if she can prove she's a real witch, he'll let her go. She promptly unleashes her abilities and melts the ice on the ground right away. Petrov tells her to come with him, and the girl asks where he's taking her. He replies that he's taking her to a place for witches. Petrov's assistant picks the girl up in his arms, while the little boy left behind shouts for them to let her go, reminding them that they promised to leave her alone. Their boat sails down the river, and that's when we learn the girl's name is Paper. There's no doubt she's an orphan. Only someone with such a simple name would be. I'm glad that even though this is a Chinese comic, they still use English names. Otherwise, I would have had to come up with random names for every witch, which would have been fun too, I guess. Anyway, Petrov promptly offers her some food while asking why she won't use any blankets. He admits that they are definitely not the most comfortable thing, but they'll keep her warm. As the girl blows on the hot food, she says that she'll make it dirty. Petrov reminds her that the sailors aren't any better off than she is, and this trip is going to take 3 days, so she should make herself comfortable as much as she can. Suddenly, she burns her tongue on the hot food, and she looks absolutely adorable. Petrov then asks her about the boy, wondering if he was her friend. She tells him that he was the one who provided food, and requests Petrov to not capture him since he is not a witch. She further reveals that the boy told her that if they cleared the snow from rooftops in exchange for food, everyone would be fed. With the theater in town, no one is afraid of witches anymore. He's the one who negotiates with the adults as long as she's willing to help. Petrov finds it amazing that this little girl is helping her community to earn some honest food. He then asks her if she got any food. She replies that she did. She cleared 3 roofs. One homeowner chased her away, another gave her some bread, but the 4th house belonged to a hateful woman. He pats her gently and tells her to rest and eat well, adding that in 3 days she'll meet the prince. Of course, the mention of the prince perks her up,